Welcome to HRUnpacked, a podcast about HR workplace issues, where we analyse and then discuss the latest developments in HR and employment law that impact both employers and employees. Welcome, Kate.
Thanks. Thank you, Jonathan. Really good to be here as always. And we've got a really good, interesting and very important topic to discuss today. So we're going to be talking about men's mental health and well-being. And I'll go through a few stats and introduce you properly in a minute, but our guest is Hannah Bermudez today, who I know quite well. I wanted to quote some stats just before we started because for me they were quite startling and demonstrate why we're here discussing this issue today. And these stats come from the Priory organisation. And to quote, and forgive me because I'm reading, but 77% of men polled have suffered with symptoms of common mental health, such as anxiety, stress and depression. 40% of men have never spoken to anyone about their mental health. 29% of those say they're too embarrassed to speak about it, while 20% say there is a negative stigma on the issue. And this one in particular hit me quite hard. 40% of men polled said it would take thoughts of suicide or self-harm to compel them to get professional help. So that's why we're here talking about it today. And lovely to have you, Hannah.
Thank you.
Hannah Bermudez, Director of People and Culture at Salford City Football Club, not too far from where we are today. Not only that, you are a management coach and mentor, and I know from working with you closely that you've built the HR team up pretty much from scratch, haven't you, at Salford City? Yeah. So one, great to have you, but it'd be lovely to know a little bit more about yourself and do your own intro, Hannah.
Okay, so I've worked in HR for about 15 years. Started at a minimum wage job all the way up to managing a department. Then I came over to the football club to set up the HR function from scratch. I then ended up with safeguarding, player care, EDI, well-being, and doing a little bit around the fan experience now as well. Yeah. So there's just the role has grown beyond what I could have imagined when we first had a conversation, Kate. Yeah. And I absolutely love every minute of it. You know, I wouldn't change it for the world. And football is such an amazing industry to work in, and I feel very fortunate and very privileged to be in the role that I'm in and being able to make a difference to people's lives, not only within the club but in the wider community as well.
Yeah, you know, and I can tell that every time I speak to you that you talk about the work that you're doing, the community work, which is really important, but you just ooze that enthusiasm, which is so important, and no wonder your department and your responsibilities have grown. So great to have you.
Football clubs have embraced HR a lot over the last decade. From what I've seen, how did you get involved with the club initially, and how have you developed that HR provision then?
So I think it was just an aftermath of COVID. So I was going through my own personal issues at the time. Just before COVID, my husband was actually really poorly. My husband had cancer, and obviously the mental health impact on him at the time and us as a family was huge. And then obviously COVID came. Pretty much a year to the day he was diagnosed actually, and then I was working 80-hour weeks. You know, there was key workers, furlough, and Kate knows the whole shebang that came with HR departments. In terms of the profession itself, it was under a huge amount of strain. Very difficult to work in HR. You know, getting used to different ways of working with absences, the health and safety side of it, the protocols. You know, all of that. You know, people in isolation. It was just a strange world to live in for 2 years. And then after that, I just kind of thought, I don't want any more illnesses to dictate my life anymore. So I just saw this job out of the blue. I wasn't really looking for it. I thought, I'll just apply for it. You know, nothing will come of it. And lo and behold, I got an interview, and Kate interviewed me at that time. And I kind of not looked back since, really. It was just, I think it was one of those things where the universe was saying, right, let's go for it. And you know, it's taken me on a journey I never thought I would go on. You know, I've worked in the public sector, I've worked in retail, but I think I feel very much at home within the sporting industry, and that's quite an amazing thing to feel comfortable where you are.
Yeah, and you were at the Euros last week.
I was, it was amazing, honestly. Like, and that's the thing with football, it's just all around the emotion, and you know, you all come together. It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, what your cultural background is. You're all there just to watch people play that beautiful game, which is football.
Yeah.
It does bring people together. Football always has to, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So what have you witnessed around men's mental health in your time at Salford and other places?
I think obviously from a personal point of view, it's seeing how men deal with it slightly differently, where, and me and my husband have had conversations about this recently around how did you feel going through that at the time, and he was saying to me, I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to come to terms with my own mortality almost, which you're in that time when you don't know really what's happening, what treatment options are available. But also he wants to be the strong one, he's the provider, but then you've kind of got me on the other side going, I'm worrying about family, jobs, you know, what's happening with the house and things like that, probably a bit more vocal about it. And I think it's just very much a stereotype and a social norm not to speak about it from a men's point of view.
Yeah.
And I think that's changing now, and that's certainly something in football you see more of. So people like Gary did his Dele Alli interview. You know, there's lots of people being way more vocal around mental health, because the power of football to spread those messages, to break down that stigma and even sometimes discrimination, particularly in sport, which is very competitive, is really important. And I think you're starting to see that more within the sport. So roles like safeguarding and player care are now becoming very prominent and established, because it's important to teach people, particularly in the younger age groups, what the right way is to deal with that. And the sooner you get help, the better.
So where do you kind of where have you practically started with that? How do you, because you've built it up from very little, you know, how have you made it live and breathe to be open and honest? What initiatives have you put in place?
So originally when I came to the club, I was new to football. I didn't really understand the environment in which I was operating. So my first protocol really was to just sit down and speak to every single member of staff and unpick what's happening cultural-wise within the club, what's happening in the industry as a whole, speak to governing bodies like the EFL and the FA and things like that. And I think it's just to get a really good understanding. So I spent about 6 months doing that. And then World Mental Health Day came around in October 22. And mental health really for me was one of the first things I wanted to tackle. I really wanted to break down those stigmas. So we decided to do a bit of a launch. So I'm very fortunate because in the football club and in football clubs you have your own medical teams, so I have access to a GP. And so really my first protocol was speaking to Mubin, our club doctor, and our head of medical now, to explore what the issues were around staff, what was happening with players, what was happening with their families, because it's not just in football. Yes, you're an employee of the football club, but it's actually spreads to their families. You know, football's a huge sacrifice for people and it impacts their families. So I really wanted to unpick some of that. So we used World Mental Health Day as a bit of a launch pad for bringing in our own in-house mental health practitioner. So, and we expanded our club doctor's GP service, so now he can see anyone in the club and their families. So we'd set that initiative up. And we really used that as a launch pad to break down stigmas, and I really wasn't sure how that was going to go at first. Then there was a player called Theo Vassell, one of our defenders, who had been on his own mental health journey, and we approached him and said, will you do a interview with Gary? So I went to the board and said, Gary, would you like to interview Theo if we have his permission? And he was all for it. So he basically did a 20-minute video around that, which is on YouTube and anyone can access that. And we decided we would film that and then launch that to staff and premiere it. Now, I was having kittens at the time thinking, I don't know how this is going to be received. Are we going to get trolled? Is how's Theo going to react? What if people are mean about it? You know, you're supposed to be a footballer, you know, what are you talking about this for? You know, all that, those types of scenarios run through your head. It couldn't have been the opposite. It was so supportive. It had a huge impact on the staff that were attending at that premiere. And then with Theo's permission, we actually went out externally with that video. And again, the praise was amazing. And there were a lot of players that didn't realise the journey that Theo had been on, didn't understand what he was going through. And the support within the dressing room itself and the management team, it was just amazing. You know, they were so supportive. And, you know, we've carried that on ever since. So, you know, we've done other things, you know, that other places will usually do. So mental health first aiders, we have 1 to 13 provision for that. We have obviously Health Assured do our EAP, our Employee Assistance Programme, which is huge, and we work very closely with Health Assured on that. We're about to launch the Employee Assistance Programme for our fans, for our season ticket holders for this season, which is going to be a great benefit to them.
It's a great idea, that.
It's a great, I didn't know that. That's amazing, that.
We'll be the first club to offer that to the fan base, which is amazing. So we're looking to launch that very soon. And we do lots of different, try and do different initiatives in the academy itself. So we have scholars, they're called, and they're our under 18s team.
Yeah.
They're basically apprentices, so they're training up to be footballers and they'll do their education. Part of that is a life skills programme that they do, so we do a lot around mental health for that. So again, this last season Theo came in with me being our club doctor to speak to our scholars and, this is my journey, and if you want to speak to me, offer that mentorship, because I think someone like me going up there and preaching about it doesn't have the right impact than someone that they can really relate to and who's been through it and been on their journey. So
what impact do you think he had? Because obviously his story is engaged people, he's compelling, he's got all that support. What difference did that make to the end receiver?
So it made people come forward and speak up. So that's the first step. Just speaking up to someone else is huge. So, and it allowed us to put those early adjustments in place, early interventions. So, where scholars may have felt a certain way, for example, we were able to address that before that became a big thing. Working in partnership with different people. In terms of the adult side of things, it's allowed people and their families to come forward and access support. Obviously it's all anonymous, so the club don't receive any information around that, because we offer that as a support for them. But it's really helped in terms of nipping things in the bud that could spiral very quickly, and that's the thing around mental health. And for me, from a personal point of view, someone close to me actually attempted suicide 3 times in 2 years.
Right.
And so I know how quickly, from a personal point of view, that can spiral from being something that you think, that's pretty minor. How has it got to this point? And actually, what could I have done? And actually, it's just being there and being able, when that person is ready, to come forward and speak about it and then get strategies in place. Because I think sometimes people think, the way athletes approach it is great, really, because they understand that when you have a physical injury, it takes time to rehab it and get it right. But sometimes it'll always be a niggle and you need to manage it. The same approach with mental health, and I think sometimes people think, I'll just have 3 sessions of counselling and I'm done, I'll be fine. Actually, it's a management of the condition over time, and I think that's where things are changing, is that it's like anything. If you've got a bit of a back niggle, you might go to a chiropractor every now and then, or get some acupuncture, and you'll try different strategies. You might have some painkillers when it gets really bad. Same with mental health, you might have a variety of different options to speak or get CBT, or you may need medication. And I think that's kind of where we're moving towards, that it's not just a one-time thing or one-time event. It can be something that's been leading up to it through through your childhood, or it can be an event that happens that spirals some of that stuff. And it's just about the management of the condition. I think that's where we're now moving towards, and we approach that at the club in the same way that physical health is very much the same as mental health. It just is a different.
It's a great way to look at it, to kind of normalise it, for want of a better phrase. It's something that needs fixing, and take the support. It's a great way to do it.
Because you're right. If you break your arm, you'll go to the doctors to get it fixed. Why won't you do the same for your mind? It's always fascinating me, that. And how have you found people opening up about it? How difficult have you found it for people to do that? Because I've noticed it with some of my friends. Once they've opened up about it, it's like a release thing for them. But it's opening up is difficult. I don't know very many people that would open up about the mental health issues.
That first step is absolutely critical. So that is the biggest hurdle to get over. And I think once they do that, and they think, this isn't as bad as I thought, because I think sometimes people think, I'm going to go down a rabbit hole I'm going to never get back out of. I've had my walls up for so long that it becomes exhausting almost, and that's where you see people decline in their health. But actually, once people come forward, it's incredible how quickly they can recover. It's sometimes it can only take a couple of sessions, and then 15-minute catch-ups here, there, and sometimes it can get to a point where you don't need medical help. It's just, you can speak to your manager, or you can speak to a colleague around it who has the tools to be able to go, yeah, that's right, and get perspective on things. I think sometimes, particularly with men's mental health, there's a lot of internalisation and a lot of overthinking of this, whereas actually just get it out there, take that first step, and the relief is incredible, and the recovery is incredible as well.
You know what? I get frustrated sometimes because sometimes I think like your mental health days, some companies, it's a little bit of tokenism.
Yeah.
You know, they'll pull the fruit out and they'll get an exercise bike out on the day in the year and they'll talk about it for that day. How do you make it live and breathe? Because it needs to be part of your DNA, doesn't it? It needs to be every day.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I think I came to Peninsula and said, that well-being is not a fruit bowl.
Yeah.
I can't stand it, or a bean bag, you know.
Yeah.
I really can't stand that. To me, it comes from the top down. You need that buy-in, so that's the first thing, and I'm very fortunate that our values of the club are the welfare of the people is the highest law. I can't say better from that. From a people perspective, as a people practitioner, that gives me everything I need to take it forward.
The fact that one of your owners agreed to do that video is refreshing, you know.
The buy-in from our board and ownership group is incredible, so that helps live and breathe it.
Yeah.
I think also it's about being visible, so we do promote it, but we don't try and shove it in people's faces. You know, it's there. People are aware about it. We'll do the odd event and we'll try and time it when there are national events, but I think sometimes it can get lost in a bit of the noise that's going on nationally, and we try and do things a little bit differently at Salford, and we try and be creative in that approach. But yeah, I think it's the culture side of things is hugely critical. If you've got quite a toxic culture, your wellbeing initiatives will fail. You have to address the cultural issues first and then take forward, you know, things like wellbeing or even EDI, for example. For those things to thrive, I kind of think about those two things a bit like a garden almost. You've got to nurture it and it takes time, but if your soil's all diseased and it's not right, nothing will grow from it. So you've kind of got to make sure that you've got your foundations in place first and then grow it from there, and be creative as well, and bring it to life and have that colour that's involved in it. The difficult topics are the things that I deal with, things like EDI, safeguarding in particular is another one, and mental health. They're not easy topics to try and educate. They're not very palatable for people either, and sometimes they can come across a bit preachy and a bit tokenistic. So we do try and be sensitive to that and understand it and put it in a way that is right for our staff and for the families.
Yeah.
Football, it's quite a macho environment, isn't it? You know, historically it has been, and the initiatives you talked about are amazing. Have you seen it in other clubs as well that have implemented these type of things? Is it something which is catching momentum at all?
I think so, from a player care point of view in academies, because I think there's a realisation, there's been quite a few footballers that have come out of the academy system and gone, this whole thing has broken me as a young person. You know, the chances of getting a contract, a professional contract, which is really why those people are there, is quite low. So they need to have that plan B and the resilience of being able to do that, do you know what I mean? And I think what people forget, particularly in sport and football, is that football is very much a way of life for these people, and that's one of the big light bulb moments for me, is that it affects their families, it affects everything around them. And actually, to some people it might just be a job, but it's not. These people have been doing this since they were a child and they don't know anything else. You know, they may not have worked in other businesses, they don't know how this operates, you know, and sometimes it can be quite an insular thing to be involved in. And where, say for example, a corporate environment might have lots of different initiatives and things like that, that's pretty new for football. Very new. And I think it's only now that these prominent voices in the game are coming out that it's becoming, that is real and it's normal and we can talk about it. And at the end of the day, it's one of those things that affects performance on the field, but also just in life in general. So I think the way they approach it in football, I think they do embrace it, but I suppose breaking those barriers down can be difficult sometimes as well.
What about support at retirement? Because, you know, me and my husband go 30 years till retirement, you know, you look forward to it, but so different in football. You know, I can't even imagine retiring in your mid-30s, you know. You've experienced this exciting, fast-paced, high-profile career for many, and then it just stops. Do you have support mechanisms in?
I think we do, and I think some of the players are quite savvy around that, so they'll be building up to that point. But however, there is an acknowledgement that your career can end at any point. So dealing with injury. So I think in the same way you think about it from maybe a corporate environment where you've got people that have an unexpected illness or an injury or they do have to, either redundancy or things like that, big life events within work, and you think, what am I going to do now?
Yeah.
I think that is now becoming a big thing, particularly in academy settings for young people. I think we've probably got a long way to go with the adults in there.
Yeah.
And that is probably something that needs looking at within the game. A lot of people do go into coaching roles or stay within football. They might have their own side businesses and things like that, and really we try and teach that from an academy setting, particularly through our life skills programme. We try and give a range of options of things that you can go into. So even if you did become a pro footballer, you can go into entrepreneurship, like our owners, or you can go and do coaching and be a first team manager, or work in the women's game, or even go in transferable skills into a different sport entirely.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably something that the game does need to address as well, because it's not just mental health affects everybody, not just young people.
Yeah, it's quite a cliff edge, that, isn't it?
Yeah.
You go from all that to
all
this time. I can't,
Yeah, what do you do? And they've still got families to support at the end of the day, and it must be a really strange scenario and we talk about this a lot really, around when you're a footballer, you get told what to eat, where you need to be, what to wear. Everything in your life is set in stone really, and it's organised by somebody else, and when you don't have that, it must be a very strange feeling to have to adapt to, in the same way that you might come out of the army, for example, and you're used to having everything very regimented. It must feel a huge shift, and it will impact your mental health, because you've got to have the coping skills to be able to transition from one career to potentially something completely different.
Alex Ferguson mentioned it in one of his autobiographies, and it's the first time I had read about it in terms of football, and he talked about the worst aspect of it, and this is for someone who's managed at the highest level for a long time. He said the worst aspect of being a manager is letting the young players go, releasing them, telling them they've not got a contract at United anymore. He said he dreaded it, all the things he managed and the difficult people he managed, but that was the one thing he didn't like. And he said 1 year, rather than do it individually, got everybody in a group, like the X Factor, got them into one room and said, you haven't got a contract, we're releasing you. He said it was horrific. He said it was the worst thing he ever did. And then he realised after that, not only did he have to do it individually, but he explained some reasons why, but he had a plan for them to say, we've spoken to these clubs, they're interested in you, this is what sort of player they're after, and we'll help you try and move on. And he didn't just say, cheerio, you've been with us for 10 years, you've had a regimented lifestyle, we've got a plan for you now. And he said he implemented that culture into the club eventually, because he realised how difficult it must be for people that have had things sorted for them for so long, and they've been at the club since they were 5 or 6 years old.
Yeah, and it's a smart move really, to be honest with you, and that's kind of where the league's coming at it from now. We have to have a lot of things, there's a lot of regulation around it now, things like alumni groups, check-ins, and we are so well connected as a club that we will not let anybody down. If anyone came to us and said, such a body, I need a reference, or can you get me some experience here, we would never say no. And I think that's the thing, is sometimes from what other players have said, particularly in the Premier League, I was just left to my own devices and no one contacted me. That shouldn't happen. It really shouldn't. It's not a great way to deal with people, and I think applying a business style way of thinking to football or sport in general is not the right approach, because this is their life, this is all they've done, they've trained for X.
It's more than a job, isn't it?
It's more than a job, it really is. And it, like I say, it is really a way of life for these people, and you're basically taking their life away from them, their hobby and their passion and the love for the game. So it's very delicate, and it's very important that we have those tools in place, and I call it scaffolding really, around people.
Good analogy.
Just to help them when needed. They might not need it at all, great, but if they do, it's there if you need it.
What about social media? Because fans don't hold back, do they? I've come from a family who are all football fans. I mean, I'll confess, I love working with, I'm probably the non-football fan in my family. City, United, and they get so direct when it comes to football, and you see things on social media and it's so direct and so brutal. Do you do anything around that, or is that just kind of...
So, well, it's interesting you should say that, because last week we actually did training with our academy, so we did an away day and I did a full EDI training session with them, and part of that was obviously understanding yourself and your own, what makes you tick and your individuality, but we also looked at what's happening in the world outside of football and what influences does that have. A lot of it was around social media and the things that we see, you know, even the Euros have brought that to light. I experienced it firsthand myself, attending the games, that it's out there, it's very visible, and actually, first of all, it desensitises people within the game, and I think people become less and less shocked by it happening. But actually, your children are actually exposed to that. Yeah. And those are things that I didn't have to deal with as a child, to have to see that stuff. It even pops up when you're not even following it, you know what I mean? Or it'll end up in the, you know, the mainstream media.
It's like it's accepted now, isn't it? Like players have to accept the abuse they get. It
was interesting when I was pulling that training together, I was looking at studies and things that some universities had done, saying that young people nowadays are 30% more desensitised to things like tragedy or helping people out, just because it's constant saturation of negativity. And I would say particularly Twitter is quite bad for that. That's not to say that there are other things, you know, that wrong with social media, but I think we need to be able to teach that isn't acceptable, and this is why people have a right to their own views, but they don't have a right to discriminate against other people. And I think that can have a huge impact. And we did have a discussion actually at that training session around how does that make people feel, particularly people in the room had actually had first-hand experience of being trolled on social media, and how that's taken. And you know, those are things that you would never say to someone to their face, so why is it acceptable to do it in a written format behind a keyboard? I don't get it, but it happens, and I think we've just all got a responsibility to call that out and take it forwards. And sadly, it's accepted as part of the game. And I think there was something that I read actually when I was pulling that training together, that in one season there were 60,000 reports of abusive behaviour towards football players. Now that is shocking.
Because it absolutely is.
It's just a torrent.
You wouldn't do it in any other working environment, would you?
No.
Well, it happens, but it wouldn't be allowed, accepted.
And I think that's where, you know, should it be an accepted part of the job as a footballer? No, it shouldn't, because it wouldn't happen anywhere else, like you say. I think there's got to be an acknowledgement that social media is never going away. It has a huge amount of power to promote messages of EDI and mental health and things like that, but the flip side of it is that people can say what they want. It's fantastic in so many ways, isn't it? But then it has its downfall,
has its dark side, definitely.
Can
you kind of bring together all the strategies that you've implemented to advise other companies and other organisations on how to handle or support men's mental health?
So I suppose I do a lot of work. I work very closely with the EFL, and you know, we do work with other partnership organisations. Again, we work with our partners like Health Assured and Peninsula to support with a lot of that. And I think for me the strategy is just getting any way you can get it out there. And I think that's what we're trying to do. Is football can feel, when you're in it, and I've come from outer sector, so I felt this myself, it's very insular, and it can be very isolating when you're slightly different and you've not been in that group, or you've not had it throughout your childhood. It can feel a little strange to be in. And I think for me the strategy is to make it as open as and accessible as possible. And by that it means sometimes having uncomfortable conversations and addressing it head on, and being direct about things and calling it out when I see things that shouldn't be happening. And I think that's one of the key things. I think partnership working is absolutely crucial. I'm no expert on mental health. I've not had my own mental health issues, but I know people who have, and I've supported people my entire career who have. And I think there's no one size fits all. You've got to use your common sense and your emotional intelligence to navigate some of that, because things change, things will improve, things may get worse. You know, people might make a decision that, you know, something's not right for them in order to protect their own health, and that's absolutely fine. And it's just around being there and being visible and being vocal about it.
I hope you don't mind me asking this, because it may be a little bit personal, but I'm an HR professional as well, as you are by trade, aren't you, Jonathan? As you touched on earlier, COVID was immensely hard for the HR profession. You've gone into a business, you've set up an HR department, you've got all these responsibilities, you've got a tough job. How do you make sure you're okay?
I think I have a really good support network of people. So I think anyone who knows me knows I'm very direct, so I kind of say what's on my mind, and that's the way to do it. I can't internalise things because I know how it would affect me if I don't.
Yeah.
I think obviously there's a time and a place and a safe environment. As you know, as HR professionals, sometimes you want to tear your hair out at points, but there's a time and a place to do it. But yeah, I think COVID in particular, I felt the brunt of that more than anything. I was working like 80-hour weeks.
A lot.
And it was a lot, and, you know, managing my entire teams, you know, what's happening in their lives, and you know, the impact of that, and being locked. I remember one day I hadn't been at the house for 10 days, and I didn't actually realise it. I hadn't had any fresh air for 10 days, and I thought, this isn't right. And I think my own strategies for it is I'm a huge believer in fresh air. I do a lot of gardening as well. I just love, you know, growing things and, you know, getting out there, and it's that you've got to find something that makes you feel tranquil and at ease, and there's loads of different strategies, and, you know, going to the gym and things like that. It's really important, and for me, work can't dictate some of that stuff either. Work should be able to fit in and around that. So things like flexible working, for example, I think are huge for people's mental health, and there's obviously other benefits to that, you know, like accessibility to work and things like that for people, and opening opportunities, but actually those things make a huge amount of difference. And I think where we're finding now people are going, right, get back in the office. They're not seeing the bigger picture here. Like, how demotivating is that? And how does that feel? And people are trying to manage and juggle, and I think there's those types of things you've got to be, as a HR professional, aware of the entire spectrum of what's happening in someone's life. But I think as a HR professional, it is a really tough job, and I see it on social media a lot, that there's a lot of people feeling very disillusioned with the profession, and their mental health is suffering significantly. You know, I see words like toxic work environment, and HR gets the brunt of it, don't they? They're kind of from the top and from the staff, and you're trying to juggle everything. It's a really hard job to do, and it's not for the faint-hearted at all.
No, it used to be such a process-led job, go back 10, 15 years, and now your emotional connection with your staff is probably the number one priority, and I think some HR professionals we struggle with that, because that's not what they've been trained to do. It's evolved and got more complex and deeper, hasn't it, over time?
And to me, it's kind of the way I see it, and I don't know whether it's right or wrong, but it's kind of like you're in a relationship with that organisation. You have to know it inside and out. You've got to be able to juggle the business side of things with the financial side of things, with the people side of things, and you've got to know your stuff. You've got to know all your employment law and how to manage cases that might not necessarily fit neatly into a process, and be able to navigate to a solution somehow, but also get involved in other things that you might, you know, like I have with this other things that I do in my job. But I think it only makes things better having to know all of that stuff. So I think it's really tough as a HR professional. I think at the moment I see it quite starkly. I don't know if that's just an overhang of COVID, that we've been there through it all, thick and thin, but now things are going back to normal and things are regressing back to how they were before. And I thought COVID might have provided that opportunity to really change the way that we work in society, but I'm not sure that it's happening as well as I thought it would.
I remember when COVID happened, people kept saying it'll reset things, but, you know, time will tell whether it has or not. But on the HR perspective that you talked about, and we mentioned before on other podcast episodes, we're going back to welfare with HR. You know, HR, you're right, it became strategic, policy and that kind of process-driven approach. And at university, a lot of the modules we delivered was like that. But I've noticed now, because we work with the CIPD, we're CIPD accredited, and they advise on all the modules, and it's going back to that welfare, because people are at work for a long time during their lives, and employers are the best people to notice changes in the behaviour and the mental states as well. So it's always been the case that employers are our best place really to support people. And it's listen to some of the things you do are fantastic. I mean, you know, not just for the players, but for staff and for the fans. I mean, you know, for season ticket holders to get access to things like that, support. I've never come across that before.
Leading that. That is
leading that.
Because we know how important it is, and at the end of the day, football's a community sport. It lives and breathes its community, and we are who we are because those fans come to see us, you know, and we try and put on the best show. But we appreciate that sometimes things happen in life, and sometimes people don't have the tools to be able to deal with some of those things or feel comfortable enough to be open. It's very easy for us to say, just talk about it. But actually, some people just can't, and that's their choice at the end of the day. And I think as long as you educate and you give people choices, that's all we need to do. And I know that it has a huge amount of value to those people. So I think you're right. It's there was a reset maybe, but I think welfare is now critical, and I think we saw how in COVID our welfare suffered because of not being able to do those basic freedoms like go out,
go for a walk,
go to work and socialise. We weren't even allowed to socialise with people.
You couldn't see your parents or
and work is the first thing that slides off the table really when it comes down to it. Family's first and is always key, but it's work that will always slide first, and we can catch that quite quickly and rectify it, because actually work can have huge amount of mental health benefits as well if we get it right. But it's about making the right adjustments for people to be able to function.
So we're kind of mid-year-ish. What's on your list to do, your strategy, your agenda for the rest of 24, Hannah?
Well, it's interesting because it's halfway through the year for everyone else, but we're in the off-season now.
Of course, I need to get into football mindset.
Yeah, so we're about to start pre-season, so we're doing a lot of planning at the moment. I think we've now got a bit of a strategy around the fan experience. So for me, in my job, the way I always approach it is all around experience. Doesn't matter who it is. So obviously from with my HR hat on, it's staff. So I'm thinking about the staff experience, and then we've got fans, and then we've got all these different stakeholders, and actually it's now a case of trying to combine the two so that it's all kind of strategically linked to really maximise the benefits of what it is that we're trying to do. So we'll do certain things around potentially EDI, we might do things around mental health or even well-being in general, and we want to try and combine the two so that it can really push those messages, because like I was saying, football has a huge amount of power that sits behind it, and it's very visible to people. They come every week, or they'll travel to places for football, and actually we want to know that we're doing things right, even just from a moral perspective, I guess. You know, it's the right thing to do, and that's kind of what the club and our owners are all about. It's all around the welfare of the people. It's huge for us.
Brilliant, that.
It's fantastic, and kind of to round it off, I like the comment you made at the very start, that mental health illness is not a sticking plaster approach. You have to have a strategy, because it goes on and on and on, and can't be kind of cured or dealt with in the short term. You have to deal with it in the short, medium and long term, and all the strategies you've implemented around it are fabulous.
Oh, thank you.
Doing a brilliant job, yourself and the club overall. It's fantastic, and I love that fan support, I really do.
It's great.
And I think we're really proud of it, to be fair, and it's been a journey. It's not something that happens overnight. It takes a bit of influence in here, there and everywhere, but actually I think once people start to see the benefits of it working, and actually they're feeling much better in themselves, you can't say more than that. The well-being side of my job is probably the most important to me, both personally and professionally, so it has to be right as far as I'm concerned. So we'll try every which way to make sure that it lands in the right way.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hannah.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pleasure to have you. Thank you.
Thank you.